2 weeks ago, I was attending the Data Cloud Global in Monaco, and in one of the sessions, a veteran in the data center industry, Mr. Dean Nelson, told us that the data centers of the world are using around 2.4% of the world's electricity. That's a lot. I was like, wow, that's a shocking number. What was more shocking is that Mr. Nelson said that with the new machine learning applications, we ain't seen nothing yet. The industry is at a pace we haven't seen before, and we need to build more data centers around the world. This means that we must increase energy production, and we must find greener solutions. Data centers are important infrastructure and crucial part in the fourth industrial revolution. The same thing applies to connectivity. Just like roads and bridges, cables connecting us to the world are, in my mind, the most important infrastructure in our daily life. I mean, all of us are almost always connected, and it's just part of the quality of the life that we endure. What Iceland brings to the table is 100% renewable energy production, free cooling every day of the year. I mean, you don't go to Iceland for tanning, that's for sure, but it's a great location to cool down your servers. And the savings, they're between 30 and 40% just by doing that. And that means more waste of energy, which is very important because energy is getting more scarce. And in Iceland, we also have skilled labor force and a high-tech society. And to talk about what the Nordics, and especially Iceland, can offer to data center industry, we have a great group of panelists moderated by Kato, who's one of the founders of Verne Global, which is the first data centers to be built in Iceland. He's also a great salmon fisher and spends every summer in Iceland fishing. But to have it formal, I'm going to read a part of the bio, so you know them just a little bit before we start the discussion. This is just the short version, so you can find the full bio on the website of this event. But Kato is a serial entrepreneur and a long-time early-stage tech investor. He's the co-founder, as I said before, of Verne Global, the first large-scale data center in Iceland, and has invested in several Icelandic startups, including CCP Games, where he served on the board for 12 years. He recently formed two Ravens, a pre-seed and early seed stage venture capital firm. Vala Valthorsdóttir is a business development manager at Landsvirkjun, where she helps creating opportunities for potential customers of Landsvirkjun and supports development of new power-intensive industries in Iceland. Vala is a key member of the business development team at Landsvirkjun with a focus on international data centers. Thorvardur Sveinsson, we just call him Varði, it's much simpler, has held several key positions in the Icelandic telecom market. Prior to joining Farice as the CEO in May 2020, he held executive positions at Vodafone Iceland, including COO and CCO for enterprise and development. Before joining Vodafone, Varði was head of group development and strategy for Iceland Telecom. And last but not the least, Ernest Popescu joined Iron Mountain in 2022. As the head of global site selection, he oversees all data center development activities, including the support for continuous and uninterrupted supply delivery in existing markets, new market strategy and entry, and conversion of existing record management facilities into data centers to enable Iron Mountain to their ambitious growth plans. Thank you and enjoy the panel.
Can we hear me? Okay, great. Well, that was a little weird. Okay. Good afternoon, or good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. Takk fyrir Einar and Madam Minister for the nice introduction. Thank you all for coming out. As Einar alluded to in the beginning, virtually everything we do in our personal and professional digital lives touches one and usually multiple data centers. Simply put, we couldn't go about modern life without data centers. They are both the factory and the warehouse of the modern digital economy. So in 2007, when I was introduced to the idea of building data centers in Iceland, I was struck by the proverbial lightning bolt. I immediately understood the power of the idea because I had seen what Google and Microsoft had done in the prior decade here in the great state of Washington, which is they built unprecedentedly large data centers along the Columbia River here in Washington in order to take advantage of the large hydro power plants that are here and to take advantage of all the stuff that offered. So I immediately saw, wow, Iceland could be to Western Europe what Eastern Washington is to the United States. And done correctly, you could build one of, if not the most, both economically and environmentally efficient data centers in the world. So my co-founders and I and our partners set out to go and try to bring the global data center industry to Iceland. And over the next 15, 16 years, we toiled mightily to make that a reality. And happily, I'd say we were largely successful. So both in Iceland and in other Nordic countries, there are now multiple data centers. My company, Vern Global, was acquired for a tidy sum back in 2021. So we also built real economic value up. And Icelandic and Nordic data centers are now a real thing. So what I would love to do today is we have a terrific panel who's well suited to address this question. I'd like to explore why it is that the Nordic area, and Iceland specifically, are such a great place to think about putting data centers these days. And I think I'll start with you, Ernest, if that's okay. Ernest, you've spent many, many years doing data center strategy, site selection, development and deployment of data centers around the world for a couple of the biggest hyperscalers, notably Amazon and Facebook, and now you're doing the same thing for Iron Mountain, which itself has a large global co-location presence. So what I'd love is if you could give us a bit of historical context here about how the data center industry has evolved over the last 20 years. Historically, you would only put a data center near a large metro area with a whole bunch of eyeballs, but that is now changing. So can you tell us what's changed and why is it, what has changed such that someone might now think about building and running a data center in Iceland, and why a big enterprise customer might put their data center infrastructure there?
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, thank you for having me. I'll take a roundabout way to answer the question, but please speed me up if I'm taking too long. Typically, the data center industry is made up of, the hyperscalers who offer public cloud services, meaning that they sell the cloud, storage, compute, connectivity to enterprises. AWS, I think famously, started, the industry, so to speak, in terms of moving workloads off-prem to this public cloud, which essentially is a utility. And the developers of cloud infrastructure that look to sell to third-party customers, as you pointed out, Isaac, require eyeballs, require proximity, latency to their customers, which is why you see a lot of clustering around either sort of beachhead, tip of the spear connectivity hubs where subsea cable landings are located, or large metro areas. Then you also have a large sort of segment of development that's driven by organic, endemic growth. Example, Google search, Microsoft Office 365, that aren't as latency sensitive, which is why you see Microsoft, Google, Facebook is another fantastic example of a customer that has no third-party applications. It's all to support its native Facebook Messenger apps, and they can basically locate anywhere, and they're location agnostic, and they have little to no latency sensitivity. So that's sort of, you know, some separation in terms of the market segment. The other thing that's interesting is the hyperscalers tend to obsessively self-perform, which means that they'll buy the land themselves, develop, entitle, zone, permit, and build and operate data centers themselves. But because the industry has seen such explosive growth, they just can't meet that growth organically, internally, and it's created a third-party ecosystem of developers, co-location providers that offer multi-tenanted data center infrastructure, or, you know, built to suit to help supplement some of the gaps in supply that, you know, the hyperscalers are driving. The reason the Nordics are so interesting, and something that's recently, you know, become very conversationally top of mind, is you know, the advent and the growth of AI ML, which is entirely location agnostic. You have you know, training data centers that require a high load of compute and storage that can essentially be placed anywhere in the world, which I think is, you know, a trend that you're going to start seeing, which is that you're going to have untethered infrastructure development from the traditional highly interconnected areas, you know, the Virginias, the, you know, Hillsborough, Oregon, the FLAP, you know, Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, you know, Singapore, Tokyo, to where, you know, where a lot of the resources are drained. You know, data centers require power, water, predominantly to cool servers that, you know, require a fairly stringent temperature range to operate optimally. So, you know, I think with the popularity and advent and explosive growth that AI ML is going to drive, the fact that it's latency agnostic, not sensitive, I think, and the fact that, you know, a lot of the traditional data center markets are resource constrained, a lot of public opposition to this seemingly endless growth, I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of expansion in what was historically less traditional markets, but that are resource rich. You know, as was pointed out earlier, data centers require cooling. You know, if you can get free air cooling 365 days a year, I mean, that's a huge advantage. Outside of the infrastructure, the OpEx to power and cool a data center is probably the next biggest cost driver. So I think the Nordics generally are poised, I think, to, you know, experience some explosive growth. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah,
I
no,
kind of took a long detour along the way.
No, it's
yeah,
absolutely right.
yeah.
So we saw just what you're talking about, which is that as data centers have become more and more power intensive over the years, it makes less and less sense to put every data center in a big metro area like London, where things are expensive, where it's hard to get the resources you're talking about. So we very much saw that, and I agree that the, you know, AI, ML, generative models are only more computationally and power intensive. So we expect that. So we expect that trend to continue. Vala, on that note, Landsvirkjun, the national power company of Iceland, has very proactively and intentionally courted the data center industry going back for as long as I was involved to 2007. I'd love if you could elaborate a bit more on what specific advantages the Nordics and Iceland perhaps uniquely offer data center operators that you just can't easily find in too many other places in the world.
Exactly, thank you. Well, the Nordics have put a lot of emphasis in promoting this green image and have put a lot of focus on also into develop new renewable power options within the regions. But so if I just focus on Iceland a bit, and the power advantages that we have there is that we are already 100% renewable. The complete power generation in Iceland is from hydro, geo, and now we're developing wind projects as well, because it works very well with the hydropower. And what's also very unique for Iceland is that we are an island located in the North Atlantic Sea, and we're completely isolated from the European energy market. So we are not affected, for instance, by the European energy crisis that occurred just 2 years ago and is still ongoing. So we have very stable power prices, and that gives us an advantage as a power company to offer these long-term contracts to our customers with long foreseeability, with fixed power prices for up to many years. And also, because we are isolated from the European power grid, all the energy that is delivered to our transmission system is completely green. So it doesn't matter where you're located in Iceland, you're just using green energy. So it's very convenient and strategic for companies to locate in Iceland because you will never have to worry about any carbon emission taxes and so on. And like we've already discussed here, what's very fortunate for data centers, maybe not us living in Iceland, is that we don't have any summers. It's just like the stable temperature all year around. So we're always just around the zero. Like in summers, we just get a little bit higher, or like higher than 0 degrees, and in the winter we don't get, like people think Iceland is extremely cold, but we're always just around the 0 degrees, and that's a very good and stable environment for data centers and the operators of data centers in Iceland.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, I mean, even putting the green aspect aside for a second, the economic advantages that Iceland offers through its really almost unicorn-like power infrastructure and generation system is really, really incredible. The stability point that you raised was such a big factor for us. There are no variable cost inputs effectively that go into generating power in Iceland, which means that you know exactly what your power is going to look like, your costs are going to look like for as long as you're willing and Landsvirkjun is willing to contract with you. And that was just, there's just nothing like it in, I don't know, anywhere else in the world.
No, exactly.
So it was really spectacular. Vardi, so one of the first things that we did when we were starting off Vern was we worked very, very closely with Farice, the national cable operator, and the Icelandic government to make sure that the, at the time, second modern fiber optic cable, Danice, was laid between Iceland and Denmark. You now have 4 cables. Congratulations. So you recently turned up Iris, the new system. You know, laying cables is a tremendously costly, complex, and difficult undertaking. So I'm curious what the motivation was of the stakeholders involved in the project. Why did they decide to do it? And you know, how does it interplay? I mean, I know Farice. How does it come into play?
Yes, we're quite happy that we opened our IRIS system now about 3 months ago, and it was put in place to augment and increase the redundancies of our existing system. Because what we need to think about really is how the internet works. Okay, we are faced every day with applications like Facebook, and we hear phrases like 4G, 5G, which is really the kind of customer-facing aspect of a large creature, which is called the internet. But the internet is actually quite deep. And what we're doing is when we're using Facebook, we're using maybe 4G on our mobile phone to connect to a local data center that might be located in Reykjavik. But Facebook really isn't just there. It's connecting to data centers in Europe. And if you want to watch a video of a cat that actually originates in Washington, US, it needs to travel between data centers in US all the way to Europe, and from Europe to Iceland, where you can consume the content. Now, this is basically connections of data centers. And the data centers are connected primarily actually through submarine cables. 99% of data goes through, data on the internet goes through submarine cables. And when you understand that, and you understand where Iceland is, you understand why submarine cables are tremendously important for Iceland. Without them, we are an island in the North Atlantic with a fully functioning, modern, redundant internet connections. We are integrated in the digital world with the rest of you here. That was the primary goal of the IRIS system, to increase the redundancies. But furthermore, what we did, we designed the system in a way that would reduce the latency between Iceland and continental Europe, specifically the British Isles or Ireland. So we went pretty straight path into Ireland, reducing the latency. And that then comes to the secondary part of the question. What was the driver? It's actually to support the data center industry in Iceland. Because with the low latency connections, with increased redundancies and competitive prices, we are actually a critical component, critical infrastructure, allowing data center operators to take advantage of the sustainability of the power generation and the cool climate and everything. So those two factors were the reasons why we built the IRA system.
Yeah, fantastic. Farice also, in addition to Landsvirkjun, was incredibly supportive of, it always has been, of the industry. I mean, I think really your success and the data center industry's success in Iceland are inextricably linked. It's a happily codependent relationship. So we always appreciated it. Ernest, I'm going to come back to you. So while I would say that the data center industry in the Nordics has grown very nicely and very steadily over the last 15 years, given the really incredible value proposition, I'm actually surprised that it hasn't grown faster and a little bit more exponentially. And maybe that's just around the corner with AI and ML. But let me play a little bit of the devil's advocate here. What are some of the things that hold back growth of adoption of the Nordics for data centers? What advice, as an operator, developer yourself, what advice would you have for the governments, the service providers? What can they do to help drive that growth?
Yeah, no, I think great question, and I think we've kind of alluded to it a little bit. I think connectivity is a critical play. I think data centers require power, water, land. Connectivity is critical. So I think that obviously requires a concerted, deliberate effort to bring redundant fiber, backhaul, long haul. So I think that's key. I think second, we've kind of talked about it a little bit in my sort of long spiel. It's latency was critical, and the fact that latency was critical and remains critical isn't mutually exclusive with the fact that AI, ML is latency agnostic, and obviously the Nordics are remote. So as you've already pointed out, whenever you call, an application on your phone, it travels and it pulls the data, whether it's cached or localized in a remote area, and then it comes back to your phone. So that the Nordics are isolated, so that the travel time, even though measured in milliseconds, is important for enterprises. Less so for the cat videos, but more so for people doing transactional financing, where milliseconds cost money. But so I think what you're going to see is a push towards the edge. You're no longer going to see these sort of mega regions in terms of customer base that requires latency sensitive data center infrastructure. But then you're also going to see massive campuses in regions that aren't resource constrained, in regions that offer friendly economic development incentives, that are well connected, that have free air cooling, that have water, which again is a critical component, particularly for adiabatic, indirect evaporative cooling. So I think it's a matter of time. Personally, this is a personal opinion. We alluded to the fact that data centers use 2.x% of the world's electricity. I think the public cloud penetration is still measured in teens, which is frankly a misnomer because the denominator keeps increasing. There's no it's an insatiable appetite. The pictures on your phone used to be 1 megapixel, now they're 20 megapixels. Everything we do, data use is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So I think it's just a matter of time, and I think investment in infrastructure to create a fertile data center development infrastructure environment is key. Connectivity, obviously natural resources you can't conjure. The fact that the Nordics have stable temperature, power, water is phenomenal, and then obviously there have to be economic incentives. The biggest one is no surprise, as expensive as the infrastructure is. The hardware CapEx is 10x that. So for every $1 billion spent in data center infrastructure, the hardware CapEx is $10 billion, and it gets refreshed every 4 to 5 years. So having, fertile conditions from an economic development perspective in terms of personal property tax reductions, exemptions on data center assets, hardware, I think is critical. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think we're going to see an explosion too, just because of all the things that you two have done in order to make it easier and easier for people to come to Iceland and the other Nordics. I think that's likely to happen. Vala, I want to talk a little bit about the green aspect of this. So when we started Vern Global, it was in the middle of a green tech boom, and then the global financial crash happened, and pretty much everybody stopped talking about their environmental responsibility. We're now here in 2023. My sense is that things have changed and that more and more large enterprises, and particularly those I think the Europeans have always been a little bit ahead of us in the States, but now even number of companies in the U.S. are really taking their environmental impact quite seriously. But I'm curious, what are you hearing when you're approached by data center operators or big enterprises? What's their sentiment around the green aspect of Nordic data centers?
Good question. Well, we at least have always known at Landsvirkjun and in Iceland how valuable renewable power is. And we've always thought that we have this really competitive product. And in my opinion, it wasn't like a clear shift in perspective from companies. It's been more like a gradual interest in this, and especially after the Paris Agreement.
Yeah.
A lot of companies have set forth extremely ambitious climate goals, and I think they're just realizing now how short, like it's all coming now, like usually the end goal is around 2025, I've been hearing. So now I find that there's, most definitely a shift. There's a really high demand after green energy in Iceland, and companies and new industries are really seeking opportunities in Iceland and to develop their industries there, which is good for us because now we are in a position where we have this line of projects and we can actually prioritize what we want for Iceland and what will benefit Iceland as well. So it's not just the companies that are benefiting from Iceland's green image, it's also us. So it's just like we're looking for win-win projects in Iceland. So that's very fortunate to be in that position.
Okay, thank you. I know we're running short on time, so Vardi, I'm going to save the last question for you. I know you've got your fourth cable going now, but I know already there are other operators and people who are thinking about even further expansion of the cable network to Iceland. What's next for Farice? And I guess related to that, importantly, how do you for many companies, like power is the single biggest operational expense for data center companies, but bandwidth is also a significant component. So how do you keep bandwidth pricing competitive? It has to be that way in order to attract. It's a complex equation of what people go through.
So number of questions. I'm going to start with what's next. Our oldest system, Farice 1, is 20 years old this year. So we are currently doing what we call a 20-year review. So and based on that, then we will decide on whether or not we will push ahead with a new project. To build a submarine cable is a complex project. It's quite expensive, and will take around 4 years from that decision is made. And cost per capita, you have to remember that there are 400,000 people who live in Iceland, and I'm rounding up. So cost per capita is quite high, and the demand for resilience and redundancy is extremely high. We can never go down. So when we make a decision on investing in a submarine cable, it's always based upon a well thought out plan. And that kind of leads into the second question on other submarine cables operators. Will they come to Iceland? Hopefully. I honestly do hope that we will have developed a data center industry in a few years' time where this will become, there will be multiple operators with multiple cables, and the redundancies will be even better. The business case can be a challenge, but hopefully we will be there in the end. And then to the final part of your questions regarding the competitiveness of the price. Even if we are only selling really international connectivity to Iceland, we are in competition. We are in competition with other Nordics. When a data center customer chooses to locate in Iceland, they usually don't just talk to a single data center in Iceland. They go through a tendering process, and they, look at other Nordic countries, and they compare power prices. They compare total cost of ownership, which includes the connectivity cost. So already we are benchmarked on competitiveness with other Nordic regions, which are then providing connectivity over similar distances as we are. So that's what we strive to. We need to be competitive in order to be able to support the data center industry, in order to be able to basically invest in our submarine cables. Yeah.
Yeah, it's we think many Americans think of you as a socialistic kind of environment up in the Nordics, but it is fiercely competitive in terms of industry from my perspective. So which I think is fundamentally healthy. Well, I want to thank our panelists for joining us today. Unfortunately, we won't have time for questions, but I imagine a few people will be around if anybody does want to ask about data centers in the Nordics. I personally think that we're only getting going, and you will see more and more data center build-outs and operations landing in the Nordic region. It is really one of, if not the best places in the world to build a large-scale data center. And you may not realize that you're looking at data that passed through Iceland or Norway or Sweden, but it is. So it actually matters to all of us in this room. So thank you very much, everybody.